We're going to dedicate this entire video to one piece of equipment, and it is used for injecting fertilizer into a drip irrigation system. It can also be used for putting fertilizer into any number of different submatic or above ground sprinkler systems for lawn, home, or gardening, as well as at businesses. So let's take a look at this thing and let's discuss what I've learned with my experimentation. The product in question is a premium lawn and garden feeder made by a company called EZ-Flo. The components consist of the tank, as you see, the cap, with 3 slow selections over here, and then a fast feed over here. And these have specific gallons that it will take before this tank needs to be refilled with fertilizer. If you notice, my line has a slight blue color to it. Instead of buying expensive dyes, which you can get at a garden store, I went ahead and just used food coloring. The tank has to be completely filled. It has to be devoid of air in order to operate. Now you're going to have just a little bit of air because you cannot get a reverse meniscus in this when you fill it with fluid. Going over the whole system real quick. We've been over this before and I'm not going to belabor the point. You have these valves that most of them are closed right here, but when open, the fluid comes up through here, down through this meter, so I can measure how many gallons are actually flowing, so I have a clue when this is empty. It goes into a venturi, which we'll be discussing in detail in just a moment, then back up, and in this case it's going out through this line on the end, where it then goes into the deal, and it goes over to, if I can zoom it in, goes over to my 5-way distribution system. Coming back to this, you have a venturi inside here, an orifice plate. There are several different colors. The one that I have in there right now is a red one, and it's a 1/8 inch. Before you go about thinking and making your own orifice, different sizes and stuff, be aware of the fact that if you have the wrong thickness, you're going to block this black line, because that red orifice fits right up against a wall in there, and this thing feeds right there. That's where the pressure is going to be the highest. That's where the most amount of pressure that it flows forward is going to be striking, and it comes up. It comes up into this area right here, indicated by this blue, and it even says in on the thing right here. And then using essentially a jet pump, which is one of the most efficient pumps that exists, it pressures across that, producing a differential in pressure, just like down here. It's high pressure on the black side, low pressure on the clear side. Produces a differential in pressure, and then it sucks the water that's down inside here up into this thing and then out. And this thing does mix some water into this tank, so it's not like you're pulling this tank dry against a vacuum. It's putting water into it. It has a mixer inside which keeps everything in suspension and then pulls this stuff out. Now, as far as determining how much fertilizer you're using, I'll do a special video just on that, because the amount of fertilizer that you're putting down, which I'm going to call a dope rate, is going to depend on the concentration of fertilizer that's inside this, which is being further diluted as it goes into this exit on the pipe side to go out to distribution. So you're getting a ratio, a diluted ratio of fertilizer. So you might have to fertilize, say if your timer runs for 30 minutes, you might have to fertilize your garden over 3 days to get the right fertilizer mix that you need, just depending upon the concentration and the feed rate. I keep this one on slow. On slow, using the red orifice, it requires 188 gallons of water passing through this meter, which is why this meter's here, so I know how many gallons of water have passed through before the thing will run. Now, the piece of paper that comes with it says that you need at least 30 to 7.5 gallons of water flowing per minute. My system, because of the drip emitters that are on it, will never achieve that. So what I've done is I've bumped my pressure from 20 pounds to 30 pounds, and at 30 pounds there's enough sufficient pressure flowing through here to pull the fertilizer out. And I've tried it on these 3 low settings and on this fast feed setting, and it has pulled the fertilizer out with no problem. This right here, if you can see how blue that is, that was a test on the low pressure side after I had tested the high pressure side after bringing my pressure back up to 30 psi. I spent several hours last night playing with this with different pressures, trying to find the sweet spot for where this would work the best. I would recommend that you run about 30 psi on your system. Now the pressure, when everything is up and running, it's going to drop a little bit. So you need 30 pounds coming into this so that when it's up and running and it drops off some, you still have sufficient pressure to run that. And you're going to have to find the sweet spot based on your system. This is not a one-size-fits-all, and I'm not going to try to explain the math behind what's happening as far as fluid and fluid dynamics. That is beyond the scope of what I'm going to spend time with. There are many, many people that can help you to learn what's going on with this, but for the average Joe, this is above and beyond anything they need. So let's look at the next aspect of this. When you buy the kit, you get this piece right here, which the orifice fits in, which allows the fluid to come out and go in. You get the black tubing, it's about 5 feet. You get these 2 ball valves, and you get the tank and the 3 orifices. Which I'm putting on the screen here. These quick disconnects that I have here is because every time I'd run the system on different pressures, I would disconnect from there. I would flush clean water through the thing to clean it out to see if I was pulling fertilizer. Again, the coloring that you see in there is food coloring. The tank has 2 tubes on the inside which drop in. One is an agitator. The fluid coming in is agitating the thing to keep it all stirred up in there. And the other is a pickup which brings the fluid to the top, where the jet pump grabs the fluid, runs it through, and then injects it into this line through this clear tube, where for my system it then flows on out and goes to distribution through this system. After all of this experimentation and the massive expense of building this header system, there is $210 of valves there. There is a phenomenal amount of money involved in the brass fittings, the PVC fittings. The water meter is, I believe, $53, plus everything else that's in this system, including the emitters, the drip irrigation, and everything else. The question is this system worth the effort? The answer is a resounding yes. For the amount of crops that I'm growing and the fact that I'm out here by myself with 14 dogs that really are not interested in helping me, This is the only way that I can water my garden on any kind of a schedule. It's the only way that I can get fertilizer in there, because this is intense gardening. I'll show you just how close these crops are together. When you walk through to pick stuff, you're literally walking just side by side on everything. This is the garden. The answer is yes. The drip irrigation is worth it. The fertilizing system is worth it. Which now comes to the question, is this system right for you? The answer is a resounding yes. It probably is. It's going to require some stuff, which I'm going to show you in just a moment. But the biggest thing about this is that you have to be intelligent about it. If you're not willing to actually test the system and make sure everything is working properly, you're probably throwing your money away. The system that I'm using for my drip irrigation is made by a company called Dig. And I'm going to put the web address where I buy this stuff, and check out these people's prices. You can't beat them. It is designed to operate on lower pressures, like 20 psi. As I told you, I have to push the pressure on this. The gauge pressure with no water flowing is sitting at 30 psi. Now, granted, when it starts to flow, that pressure drops off some. But if I don't have a gauge pressure of 30 psi, the Venturi that I've been talking about does not work properly. It does work, but it's real hit and miss. So you need that 30 pounds so that it will work properly. Now, I did get it to work at 20 psi. I did get that. But at 20 psi, when I turn this system on, it drops quite a bit. And it would be even more hit and miss. So you're going to need that 30 pounds of pressure. In addition to this, I strongly recommend purchasing a water meter so that you can keep a record of how much water is flowing through this tank when you're fertilizing. If you're not fertilizing, you don't have to worry about that. But if you're fertilizing, you need to have a clue when you're running out of fertilizer in the tank. Where I would tell you it's not worth your time to buy is A, if you're not going to maintain your system. B, if you're not going to be attentive to how much fluid is flowing through your system. And the book that comes with this tank tells you how to calculate roughly how many GPM you're using per hour, per day, per month, using some basic math, a little multiplication. I know math is racist. I know that math is racist, but it's really necessary. Using a little bit of multiplication, you can figure out roughly how many gallons of fertilizer is being consumed and the amount of gallons per minute that's being flushed through the tank, and thus have an idea when to change it out. I have every intention of, when this tank is not actually fertilizing, which will only be used every 2 weeks, of disconnecting on these white separation points and taking the tank and draining it of fertilizer, flushing it out, flushing water through the top piece, keep that all nice and clean, and storing it away, storing everything in a nice dark place inside a bottle until it's time to use the remainder of the fertilizer. And I will be keeping a log of how much water is flowing through. I want to really stress that this is a good system, and I think it's right for the average Joe who will take the time to make sure that he's got everything right. Wherever your water system is feeding, if it goes through any kind of a regulator at all, which is what I'm about to show you how I regulate the water, make sure that you have 30 pounds gauge pressure when the system kicks on, that pressure can drop significantly. So you need to actually get out here and verify that you do actually have fluid flowing. And the book even points that out. It says add some coloring to it. It says use a dye, and I just use food coloring. Use a dye and make sure that it's pulling through. Now, something I want to cover real quick. If your orifice has not been placed properly inside this venturi right here, it's not going to work right. The other thing is it does not kick on the very instant you turn the water on. Remember, it has to build pressure through this system and start pulling it up. I've seen it take about anywhere from 15 seconds to about half a minute yesterday when I was playing with the various pressures. The other thing, which is critically important, and I want to say it again, critically important, is make sure that that orifice is seated properly inside there. When I dropped the little orange orifice in there, I used a piece of plastic pipe, actually this drip hose right here that you see in the image. I used that to poke it in and make sure it was seated properly inside there. If it is not seated, if it's sideways or it's not fit in there properly, it can either stop up this black hose. Remember I told you it sits right up there beside it? It can either stop up that black hose, or it can just allow water to flow through this venturi super fast, and then it is not going to work right. This system that you see in front of you has had a little bit of rough handling, and I had to reseat that orange orifice yesterday to make this thing function properly. I'm not going to belabor the point for the next 3 days, but I want to really stress how good this system is. And I think it's worth your time to purchase it. I think it's worth your time to use it. And given the fact that fertilizer is becoming more and more difficult to get, you can use alternative types of fertilizer, such as liquid fertilizers from Walmart or from your feed store. And in this case, when I first was considering running this thing, I thought about figuring out how many tablespoons of Miracle Grow I needed, but I would need like 2 boxes of it to get the proper concentration, and I didn't do that. I went ahead and went with my 20-20-20, which requires quite a bit in a water solution in order to be the right concentration for this. Again, I'll be putting together later a video specifically on the fertilizing and the dope rate that you need and how to calculate some of that. I'm not going to write a recipe book where you just plug stuff in, but I'll give you the information required so you can figure it out for yourself. Again, any information presented in this is this author's observation, and I am not going to be held liable for anyone's failure to achieve the same results I have. Dysfunctional Vet out.